They had studied humans for centuries. An unremarkable species, the Council of Elders had once decreed, more suited for curiosity than conquest. Their feeble frames, their short lifespans, their unrefined technology, all were testaments to an evolutionary accident rather than a triumph. The Droln, an ancient race who had mastered star travel millennia before humans even invented fire, looked down upon them from the blackened expanse of space with detached amusement. Within the grand chamber of the Droln's high vessel, Azul stood, gazing at the holodisplay of Earth. He was a scholar, not a warrior, assigned to monitor human behavior for his thesis. The humans had been predictable, fighting amongst themselves, over territories, resources, ideologies. Azul saw no deviation from the pattern in millennia of observation. They were, at best, stubborn. But his mind couldn't shake the faint ripples of uncertainty, an itch he couldn't scratch, growing ever since the incident at Fomalhaut 3. The Droln had built an outpost there, thinking little of the human settlers who had staked a claim on the nearby planet. The humans weren't supposed to last more than a cycle. Yet, the outpost lay in ruins now. No Droln saw it coming. How could they? Primitive creatures like humans shouldn't have had the capacity for such destruction. They are resilient, said General Natal, as he approached Azul. His armor clinked slightly with his steady steps, a stark contrast to Azul's robes. Resilient, yes, Azul replied, his voice contemplative. But to destroy an entire outpost with such primitive technology? It defies logic. They didn't destroy it through technology, Natal grunted. They adapted, improvised. That's what they do. Their instincts are sharper than we assumed. The Council had begun to take notice. The reports from other territories had been vague, bordering on dismissive. Yet, more outposts, those deemed strategically irrelevant, had gone silent. Communications scrambled, vanished. Humans, the lesser species, had been responsible. But the Droln still underestimated them. In the eyes of the Council, humans weren't a threat. Just a mistake that needed correcting. No need for full-scale war. They had protocols, after all. And protocols stated that extermination was reserved for serious threats, not animals scrabbling in the dirt. Do you believe the Council is wrong? Azul ventured, his eyes still fixed on Earth's rotating sphere. I believe, Natal said, his voice a growl, that we've made an error in assuming they cannot kill us. For a brief moment, the chamber was silent. Azul hesitated to agree out loud, but deep down, something gnawed at him. It wasn't just their destruction of Fomalhaut 3. It was the way humans operated, the way they learned from each battle. Most species broke under pressure. Most species accepted their inferiority to the Droln's might. Humans didn't. They fought. They died in waves and yet kept coming. They are adaptable, Azul murmured, thinking back to old reports. Wars on Earth, centuries ago, where humans had repeatedly invented new ways to annihilate each other, even when backed into a corner. A desperate trait, but also effective. Their adaptability is what's dangerous, Natal said. If we're not careful, we might learn that the hard way. But even as Natal spoke, Azul could sense the underlying current of disdain still held by his people. Yes, the humans were resilient, even clever at times, but nothing beyond control. Natal, pragmatic as he was, held more respect for the human species than most in the Council. The Elders, meanwhile, were entrenched in their belief of superiority, built from eons of conquest. And yet, there was something about humans. Their wars, their history of self-destruction, it all indicated a species that should have died out long ago. Instead, they thrived in their chaos. That was what intrigued Azul, the idea that something about them, something unpredictable, had allowed them to survive. We've sent observation teams to Earth before, Azul remarked quietly. None have returned. They underestimated them, Natal said bluntly. Humans may not kill out of sport like some species, but when threatened, they eliminate everything in their path. It's a tactic we don't anticipate. Azul's eyes narrowed. Do you think they could become a threat? A real one? Natal gave a hard look. If we continue to ignore their potential, yes. Azul considered this. The Council would never sanction a war, not based on the destruction of a few outposts. But what if Natal was right? What if they had misjudged the humans? He had never feared them, not truly, but now? Now, doubt began to creep in. Could a species with no regard for its own survival hold the key to destroying the drone? You'll need to see for yourself, Natal added, voice low but firm. Before it's too late. Azul turned, gazing again at the planet. Fragile. Unsophisticated. Chaotic. And yet, still there. The drone ship hovered silently above the human colony on the moon's surface, an imposing shadow against the vast emptiness of space. This was the first time they had chosen to interact directly with humans, and Azul had been sent as the observer, along with a contingent of highly trained drone officers. It was a routine operation: initiate contact, establish the terms of surrender, then extract what resources they could. Remember, Natal had warned, they are unpredictable, but their technology is inferior. Keep control, and this will be over quickly. As Azul descended from the ship with his entourage, he observed the human structures below. Primitive by drone standards, patched together with crude metal alloys, their defensive turrets little more than toys compared to the arsenal on board the drone vessel. The humans were waiting in formation, a group of soldiers lined up in a way that suggested they were following protocol but unsure what they were dealing with. Their leader, a woman named Commander Hale, stepped forward, her posture rigid but her eyes steady. Azul admired the courage it took for her to stand before an alien force so obviously superior, but to him, it was little more than posturing. "We come in peace," Hale began, her voice firm. "We've detected your presence in our system. If you wish to negotiate, we're willing to discuss terms." Azul barely acknowledged her words. "You misunderstand, Commander. This is not a negotiation. You are outmatched. We require your compliance. Resist, and we will be forced to subdue you." Hale's brow furrowed, her posture stiffening. "Subdue us," she echoed, as if trying to gauge the severity of the threat. Behind her, the soldiers shifted uneasily, hands tightening on their rifles. They were nervous. The drone could sense it, and Azul knew they would never stand a chance if it came to a confrontation. One of the drone officers, confident in their superiority, stepped forward. He held a translator device in one hand and a plasma weapon in the other, ensuring the humans understood their position. "We do not wish to engage in conflict," Azul continued, in a tone he thought was generous. "However, your resistance will not be tolerated. Your technology is far beneath ours. We could destroy this colony in moments." Hale didn't flinch. Instead, she crossed her arms over her chest, eyes locked on Azul. "We don't intend to resist. But don't mistake our willingness to cooperate for weakness." The officer beside Azul sneered, turning to him. "Humans speak of cooperation, yet look at them, barely capable of surviving on this barren rock. It's a wonder they haven't destroyed themselves already." But before Azul could respond, there was a sudden hum in the air. Hale's wrist device flickered, and an alert flashed across her screen. She frowned at it, then glanced back toward her second-in-command. "Commander, they're powering up something," the officer whispered urgently, but Hale kept her gaze on the drone. "Stand down," Hale ordered calmly. Then, to Azul, she said, "You might want to reconsider." The shift was so subtle that at first, Azul didn't register it. But then, in the distance, a power generator hummed to life. It wasn't an offensive move, not at first glance, but the fact that humans had backup systems in place so quickly after their arrival was unexpected. The drone officer's hand tightened on his weapon, his confidence faltering for just a moment. Azul could sense it, the ripple of tension spreading through their group. The humans weren't backing down. And yet, they weren't attacking either. "We've encountered superior technology before," Hale said, her voice measured. "But we're still here. You've come to the wrong place if you think we'll just roll over." Azul's eyes narrowed. This wasn't the response he had anticipated. He had expected fear, maybe submission, but instead, there was an unnerving resolve in the human commander's eyes. And more than that, a sense of preparedness. These weren't frightened primitives. They were strategists. Survivors. One of the Droln officers, frustrated by what he perceived as insolence, raised his weapon. Perhaps a demonstration is needed. Before Azul could stop him, a sharp beam shot out from the plasma rifle, aimed at one of the colony's energy shields. The impact was immediate, a bright flash of light, but the shield held. Azul's eyes widened in disbelief. That level of technology shouldn't have been able to withstand a direct hit from a Droln weapon, yet the humans had somehow reinforced it. The Droln officers exchanged uneasy glances. The humans, on the other hand, remained calm. Hale didn't even blink. "That's your only warning shot," Hale said, her voice steady. "We've adapted. You might be able to wipe us out, but it won't be as easy as you think." Azul found himself re-evaluating everything in that moment. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a revelation. These humans, with their patchwork technology and defiant stares, had found a way to resist. They were learning, faster than the Droln had anticipated. The officer beside Azul, still unwilling to accept what he was seeing, took another step forward. But Azul held up a hand. Enough. For the first time, he felt something akin to respect for these creatures. They weren't the weak, squabbling species the Droln had always believed them to be. They were resilient. They were capable of adapting to threats that should have destroyed them long ago. "We will consider your proposal," Azul said, his tone now far less condescending. Hale nodded, though there was no trace of relief on her face. "We'll be here." As the Droln retreated back to their ship, Azul couldn't shake the feeling that things had just shifted. The humans had survived against the odds, not because they were more powerful, but because they refused to be broken. And that, Azul realized, made them far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The tension had been building for days. Despite the uneasy truce, the Droln delegation and the human leaders had remained locked in a silent standoff, each side waiting for the other to make a move. Azul had tried to keep his focus on his task, gathering intelligence, assessing the humans' capabilities, but the growing unrest within the Droln ranks was becoming impossible to ignore. The humans had refused to submit, yet they hadn't outright attacked. That alone was unsettling. Back on the Droln ship, discussions among the officers grew more heated by the hour. Some, particularly the younger warriors, were eager to launch a full assault. The humans, they argued, had been given their chance to cooperate. They had resisted, however diplomatically, and to the Droln, that was an insult that could not be overlooked. Others, like Natal, urged caution. But even he couldn't hide his frustration. "We can't sit here indefinitely," Natal growled during a tense briefing. "The Council will demand action. Either we neutralize this colony or we leave and report failure." Azul listened, torn between his instincts as a scholar and the growing pressure from his people. The humans were not an immediate threat. That much was clear. But their defiance, their refusal to bow to a superior force, made them dangerous in a way the Droln hadn't anticipated. And the longer they waited, the more uncertain the situation became. "We should strike now," one of the younger officers insisted. "Show them the power of the Droln. Once they see what we can do, they'll fall in line." Azul shook his head. "If we attack, we confirm their fears. They'll unite against us. Humans are unpredictable in the face of annihilation. We've seen it before. They may not have the technology to defeat us, but they'll find a way to make our victory costly." Natal regarded Azul with narrowed eyes. "What do you suggest, then?" Before Azul could answer, an alert rang out. Communications from the human colony had just come through, an urgent request for a meeting. Commander Hale wanted to negotiate. The Droln officers exchanged wary glances. Was this a trick? An attempt to buy time? Or were the humans finally willing to concede? Natal ordered the ship to initiate contact, and soon, a transmission was established. Hale appeared on the holoscreen, her face calm but serious. "We need to talk," she began. "There's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Natal scoffed, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You've refused our terms." "That's more than a misunderstanding." Hale remained composed. "Our refusal to surrender doesn't mean we're looking for a fight. But if it comes to that, we will defend ourselves. We don't want bloodshed, but we won't be bullied into submission." Natal bristled at her tone, but Azul noticed something in Hale's expression that gave him pause. She wasn't bluffing. The humans were preparing for war, but not out of aggression, out of necessity. This was about survival, not conquest. "You have no chance of defeating us," Natal said coldly. "Our technology is far beyond anything you could comprehend." "Maybe," Hale admitted. "But we've faced worse odds before. You underestimate us because we're not like you. We don't kill for dominance. We don't conquer for the sake of it. But when pushed, we fight like hell. And we don't stop." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Azul could feel the shift in the air. The drone had always assumed humans were fragile, incapable of real resistance. But Hale's words resonated in a way that unsettled him. They were survivors. They had endured far more than the drone had given them credit for. "I don't want to see our people at war," Hale continued. "But if you force our hand, we will retaliate. And even if you crush this colony, there are billions more of us out there. You won't defeat us all." Natal clenched his fists, his patience wearing thin. "What do you propose, then? A stalemate?" "No," Hale said firmly. "I propose we both back down. You leave this colony alone, and we stay out of your way. We'll respect your territory if you respect ours." The drone officers murmured amongst themselves, clearly unimpressed. But Azul was struck by the simplicity of the offer. Humans, despite their defiance, didn't seek conquest or revenge. They wanted to survive, to coexist. In another time, perhaps the drone would have admired such a stance. But now, it only complicated matters. Before Natal could respond, an unexpected alert flashed on the ship's control panel. The drone systems were detecting unusual activity from the humans' defense grid. In an instant, a series of automated drones activated, forming a protective shield around the colony. It wasn't an attack, but it was a clear show of force. Natal's eyes flared with anger. "Is this how you negotiate, Commander? By threatening us with your primitive weapons?" Hale's expression didn't change. "That's not a threat. It's a precaution. We've made our position clear. We won't strike unless you force us to." The tension in the room was palpable. The drone weren't used to being challenged like this, especially by a species they deemed inferior. But Azul could sense the deeper truth behind Hale's words. The humans weren't looking for victory, they were looking for survival. And that made them dangerous in a way the drone hadn't anticipated. Azul stood, his voice calm but firm. "Perhaps we've misunderstood each other long enough." Natal shot him a glare, but Azul continued. "They are not like other species we've encountered. They don't fight for dominance. They fight because they have no choice. We've underestimated them once before, and it cost us. If we push them further, it could cost us even more." Natal's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The other officers were silent, waiting for his response. After a long pause, Natal finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "We will discuss your proposal." Hale nodded, though her gaze remained cautious. "We're ready when you are." As the transmission ended, Azul turned to Natal. "They're not what we expected." "No," Natal muttered, his eyes narrowing in thought. "They're not." In that moment, Azul realized that the balance of power had shifted, not because the humans were stronger, but because they refused to be broken. And that, more than anything, was what made them a force to be reckoned with. Azul found himself restless. The humans had been quiet since the tense meeting with Commander Hale, but something gnawed at him. The more he thought about the encounter, the more uneasy he became. It wasn't fear, at least not in the conventional sense, but a profound sense of something slipping beyond his understanding. The drone had always operated under a strict hierarchy, power defined superiority. Strength and technology ruled. But humans, despite their apparent weaknesses, seemed to defy those rules in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't until the second transmission came through that the situation escalated. This time, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a distress signal. The colony's communication channels crackled to life, and on the screen appeared a human engineer, her face pale and frantic. "This is Colony 7. We've lost control of one of our fusion reactors. If it goes critical, the entire sector will be obliterated. We need assistance, immediately." Natal's response was swift. "It's their problem. Let them face the consequences of their own incompetence." But Azul hesitated. The implications were clear: if the reactor exploded, it wouldn't just destroy the human colony. The blast would be large enough to damage the drone ship in orbit, perhaps even trigger a catastrophic chain reaction in nearby systems. And yet, beyond the tactical concerns, there was something else in the back of Azul's mind. It wasn't just self-preservation that made him pause, it was the plea in the engineer's eyes. The vulnerability. The desperation. "We should at least assess the situation," Azul argued. "If they fail, we'll all be affected." Natal stared at him, disbelief and anger warring on his face. "They're on the verge of annihilation. Let them burn." Azul clenched his jaw, knowing that if it were up to Natal, the drone would watch from a distance as the colony crumbled. But something in Azul rebelled against that. These humans, they didn't deserve to die this way. Not after they had shown such resilience, such determination to survive. And not when the drone could easily prevent it. "I'm going down," Azul said finally, his voice steady. Natal stepped forward, his eyes flashing. "You dare defy a direct order?" "I'm not defying you," Azul said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm saving us from ourselves." Without waiting for approval, Azul moved swiftly toward the hangar, gathering a small team of engineers and medics. He knew the risks, both from the reactor and from his own people. But he also knew that if the humans failed, the cost would be far greater than just the loss of one colony. As Azul's shuttle descended toward the colony, the tension grew palpable. He could see the reactor's containment field flickering, its energy output spiking dangerously. The human engineers were scrambling, doing everything they could to stabilize the situation, but it was clear they were outmatched by the scale of the malfunction. When Azul arrived at the site, he was met with a mix of suspicion and desperation. The humans hadn't expected the drone to help, they'd resigned themselves to facing the catastrophe alone. Yet, here he was, standing among them, willing to take a risk on their behalf. "What are you doing here?" Commander Hale demanded, her face a mask of surprise. "Your reactor is about to destroy both of us," Azul replied simply. "I intend to help prevent that." Hale hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. There was no time for distrust or debate. They needed every capable hand to avert the disaster. As Azul and his team began assessing the reactor's systems, he quickly realized the situation was worse than he'd imagined. The human technology, while functional, lacked the precision and control mechanisms the drone were accustomed to. It was a miracle the colony had lasted this long without a major incident. But even more surprising was the ingenuity the humans displayed in trying to fix it. Despite their limitations, they had managed to adapt their systems in ways Azul had never considered: workarounds, improvisations, solutions born out of necessity and creativity. For the first time, Azul saw the depth of human resilience not just in their spirit, but in their technology. It wasn't sleek or elegant like drone systems, but it was flexible, adaptable, and, most importantly, it worked. "We need to reroute the energy output," Azul said, gesturing toward the control panel. "Your system is unstable because of the feedback loop. If we can create a temporary bypass, we can stabilize the core long enough to shut it down safely. The human engineers looked at him, then at each other. Hale's second-in-command nodded. We've tried, but we don't have the tools to calibrate the bypass that precisely. Azul's eyes flickered toward his toolkit. I do. Without wasting another moment, Azul and the humans worked together, combining their knowledge and resources. The drone technology, though far superior, was enhanced by the humans' practical ingenuity. They weren't afraid to take risks, to try unconventional methods. And as the reactor's core began to stabilize, Azul realized that their very willingness to push beyond conventional solutions was what made them so dangerous, and so remarkable. Finally, after what felt like hours, the reactor's readings returned to normal. The imminent disaster had been averted. The colony was safe, and so was the drone ship in orbit. Azul stepped back from the control panel, his hands covered in the grime and residue of human machinery. He looked at Hale, who met his gaze with a strange mix of gratitude and understanding. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. You could have let us fall. Azul shook his head. We would have fallen with you. But as he said it, he knew that wasn't the only reason. Something deeper had compelled him to act, something he couldn't quite explain yet. The humans had shown him a side of themselves that contradicted everything he'd been taught. They weren't just survivors, they were innovators, problem solvers, and, above all, they were driven by something beyond mere survival. Natal, of course, would never understand that. But Azul did. And as he boarded his shuttle to return to the drone ship, he realized that something fundamental had shifted within him. The humans were not enemies. They weren't even competitors. They were something entirely different, something the drone had never encountered before. As the shuttle ascended into space, Azul couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The drone had come to dominate and subjugate, but now, they had encountered a force that could not be so easily controlled. And in the end, Azul wondered if it would be the humans, not the drone, who would shape the future of this galaxy. Azul stood on the bridge of the drone warship, staring out into the vastness of space. The colony below was safe, the reactor stabilized, and yet, a strange sense of unease lingered. His comrades had not spoken to him since his return from the human colony. Natal, in particular, had been furious, not because the mission had failed, but because it hadn't gone the way anyone expected. They had arrived, fully prepared to dominate, but instead, they had encountered something far more unsettling, an unknown force hidden within these fragile beings. Azul glanced at his reflection in the viewport. The cold, calculating mask he had worn for so long as a drone warrior was starting to crack. His perception of power, dominance, and control had been challenged in ways he never imagined. What the humans lacked in brute strength or advanced technology, they made up for with something far more dangerous, an indomitable will, an ability to think beyond the immediate, to adapt, to survive against odds that should have crushed them. He thought of the human engineer, her hands trembling yet steady as she worked to reroute the reactor's energy. That determination in her eyes, the refusal to give up even when faced with certain doom, had stuck with him. He had seen countless species fold under the pressure of the drone's might. They would plead, they would beg, they would offer anything to avoid annihilation. But humans, they defied the very nature of surrender. Natal approached, his steps deliberate and measured, his face carved with disdain. I warned you, Azul. Helping them was a mistake. Azul didn't respond immediately. He knew this confrontation was coming, and he had prepared himself for it, but something inside him rebelled at the idea of Natal's words carrying any weight now. Was it? He finally asked, his voice calm. They are weak. A nuisance. We could have destroyed that colony and ensured our dominance. Azul turned slowly, meeting Natal's gaze. And what would that have proven? That we can crush them with brute force? We already knew that. What we didn't know, what I didn't understand, is that they are more than just another species to conquer. They fight with an intelligence and resilience we've never faced before. Natal scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. They fight out of desperation, nothing more. They know they're inferior. No, Azul said firmly. They fight because they believe in something greater. That's what makes them dangerous. They don't just fight to survive, they fight to overcome. To adapt. To thrive. Natal's eyes narrowed, his tone darkening. You've grown soft, Azul. You speak of them as if they are our equals. They are not our equals, Azul admitted, but there was a sharp edge to his voice. They are something different. Something we cannot understand yet. And that is why we must be careful. Natal's lip curled in disgust. Careful? You think we should fear them? Azul stared at his comrade, the words hanging between them like a challenge. Yes. We should. There was a pause, heavy with tension. Natal's expression hardened, but he said nothing further, turning on his heel and storming from the bridge. Azul watched him go, knowing that this was far from over. Natal's pride would not let this go quietly. There would be consequences for what had happened, but Azul wasn't afraid. He had seen something in the humans that the rest of his kind would be forced to reckon with soon enough. In the following days, the drone warship remained in orbit around the human colony. Reports came in from the drone leadership, demanding explanations for why the mission had not resulted in the expected subjugation. Natal sent his reports, full of condemnation for the humans' so-called weaknesses, yet Azul remained silent, choosing instead to observe. It was during one such observation that something extraordinary happened. The human colony sent a message. Not a distress signal, not a request for aid, but an invitation. Commander Hale herself appeared on the communication screen, offering a simple but profound gesture: peace. The humans, recognizing the drone's superior technology, acknowledged their power. But they offered something more in return: an alliance. A partnership that would benefit both species, pushing them toward greater understanding and cooperation. Natal scoffed at the offer, of course, calling it a sign of their desperation. But Azul saw through it. This was not a plea for mercy. This was a calculated move. The humans knew the drone could obliterate them, yet they offered peace from a position of strength, not weakness. They were playing a game the drone had never encountered before, a game of long-term strategy, of diplomacy, of leveraging strengths that weren't immediately obvious. Azul pressed the button to open a channel back to the human colony. He spoke clearly, his voice betraying no emotion. We accept your offer of peace, Commander Hale. Let us discuss terms. Natal's outburst could be heard throughout the ship, but Azul didn't care anymore. He had seen enough to know that continuing down the path of conquest would only lead to ruin. The drone, for all their strength and technology, had underestimated the humans. And that had been their greatest mistake. Later that night, Azul sat alone in his quarters, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The drone had always believed that their superiority was absolute, that no species could challenge them. But the humans had shown them something entirely new. It wasn't just their resilience that made them dangerous, it was their unpredictability, their ability to adapt and overcome. They didn't rely solely on brute force or advanced technology. They used everything at their disposal: their minds, their creativity, their unshakable will. As Azul stared out into the stars, he realized that the drone's time as the galaxy's dominant force might be nearing its end. The humans weren't just another species to be conquered, they were the beginning of something new. Something greater. And in time, the rest of the galaxy would come to realize that as well. But for now, Azul was content with the knowledge that he had made the right choice. The humans had earned his respect, and perhaps one day, they would earn the respect of the entire drone empire. A faint smile touched his lips as he whispered to himself, "We don't kill humans, because we might just need them to survive." In that moment, Azul knew that the future had changed, not just for the drone, but for the entire galaxy. And he, for one, was ready to see where that future would lead.